I was just listening to Britney Spears song inside of a coffee shop. Hi, if you ever see this, you're pretty cool. I saw you once at a fair in Vermont. And then she said in her song, I must confess that my loneliness is killing me. And then nowadays where she's not active in the music scene, she's prescribed medication to take, and if she doesn't, she's in trouble. But if a backdrop is gone, the more important question is, why would it leave from its forefront if it was making a U? Because the length between making the depth perception was the dimension that was hidden. Hashtag fly unit. Because you can catch them off guard. And what's funny is the amount of information for that to look like on the screen isn't that different than you just seeing these, thinking these are little tiny LED lights, but it's just the metal refraction. And especially from a distance, they're enhanced because they look more like that. And that's not that much information, but that is a lot the same as a backdrop the size of a tunnel being the size of a paper's edge. Then you can do stuff like eradicate malefficiencies like flies, the fly unit be swiped out, and they'd be confused by that. So we can flatten a plane base, and so its backdrop isn't connected. You can ostensibly achieve an object in 3D being just 1D, or appearing to be just 1D. And in 1D, I mean all you would see the edge of the paper. That's how flat it would be if it was 1D, but not perfect, if the backdrop just wasn't connected to the forefront, but you're viewing it from the forefront, so that's why it appears 1D. So a crumb can seem like a perfect sphere, the same way that a tunnel can seem flat if its backdrop isn't connected to the ground. You can make it seem as though it were flatter than the side of a piece of paper if its walls were strong enough to be the size of a tunnel. So a tunnel can't be flat, but it can be really close to being flat. It's just like a crumb can never be a perfect circle, but it can be close to being a small dot. So the difference between a tunnel and a cave is not only its shape, it's how dense it is. So if you have an incredibly dense tunnel or a cave, then it can be a monolith because nothing would be able to break through it. And that cave, its lining can be paper thin. So you could have a piece of paper and have the entire thing within it if it was flat. Yep, suffering is a set of a lackluster and due diligence. And when it's pinching you, it's like the strike of a snake's neck or a scorpion breaking, because it curves upwards and then hits. So that's how a worm acts when it's doing that. So if a worm had that ability with really sharp fangs and was quicker than a snake and was 200 pounds. And fireflies are really good at being bright because that's what their back abdomen is. The back abdomen of a pincher bug is like a worm, but it has an exoskeleton. This thing in Africa when it was shown, and I was like, that's a UFO inside of a glowing ball. UFO alien. And they're like, look, it's an angel. And this is on the internet. Someone showed me this from Africa. Another time I meditated and heard an African. But for other things, some can be robots put together well. One robot is a robot cop, and that was a movie where his whole, above his mouth, his whole face was a robot. But damn, does that look like the ending of Top Gun. So if this was a RoboCop, I'd have no idea what it was. Searching out on the ground for lights, maybe a tiger got loose or a different thing I should know about, but I don't because I don't have a helicopter and I'm not inside of one skull or part of its mouth. So that's like a giant bullet from a ninja giant robot. Some things are just mistakes that shouldn't have happened, but that's why some people are here, because they leave. So it didn't even make sense in the first place. Most things you need to take charge, and if you don't, you shouldn't be under an assault. But what is an assault if you aren't taking charge? Well, then you'd be lukewarm. So when they say, what do you buy into? What do you prescribe to? What's your beliefs, Mark? Here's where things get interesting, where they could not tell me which card it was or if it was positive, so that they were going to just send me another one for a charge because they were holding information, because it was all for my safety, because my coordination was gone. They were saying, I cannot verify this with you because I don't know if you're the card holder. So that argument is on epic scales where they're not sure it's you. That's a massive dog whistle where you might not be able to prove your own duty. When you're locked inside of a phone booth for no reason, if you went in and then it was locked and you found out there wasn't supposed to. And if you were to wipe out the middle class in order to gain access to heaven on earth, it quite might be the opposite, where you birth a swamp from your own structure, and that swamp might not be reversible. Unlike in heaven, there is the possibility of grace and repenting. In hell, there is no repenting because all bets are off. And the reaction times are huge. And so if you have two different bodies, they're not going to have the same reaction time. In physics, that's literally impossible to do, because of the speed of light is the only thing that can have the same reaction time. And since you're not of the speed of light, you'll never have the same reaction time twice, and you'll never have the same reaction time of a different body other than yours. Claiming to do so is not only impossible, it's not even supposed to be thought of as real. Everyone, we need to get educated so we can think smarter. As of right now, there's been talk, and then some people are talking and they don't like to hear others talk. And so at this point, it could be the end of the species for that reason alone. Now, we're back to protein and calcium. Is that okay to talk about? It all depends. So what if there was a calcium from a electric thunderbolt or radiation? And what if there was protein from a spike, like a protein and a spike inside of a fluid? And what if those were two of the same thing? Just as my shedding a skin and a snake shedding a skin is both doing the same action, just with a different material, but it enacts the same thing on a body. Different bodies, nonetheless a body. Where it's similar but kind of different. I felt this feeling where I was like a snake, even though I'm not. So I had this feeling when I went to sleep underneath the sun in Virginia Beach. I woke up, my whole body was red and I had sun poisoning. I was so dehydrated, I feel like I was gonna throw up. More impressively, the skin on my body came off. Almost all of it. I'd say about like 80% of it, except for like the hair under my scalp. I mean, my skin under my hair on my scalp, that stayed. But I shedded so much skin that everything came off. Almost as if I were a snake. Almost as if I were a snake shedding its skin. I'm thinking the difference between my skin and then snake skin is the snakes have scales, whereas your epidermis has little like dots on it, and then in between the little dots is like equivalent to a scale. It's not the same shape, but you can make the ratio difference, and our skin is probably like lighter because it breathes easier, so we can sweat out of it, as opposed to a snake where you've probably never seen a snake sweat because I don't think it has pores, not under its epidermis. But in that faction, or besides that faction, the skin on me and the snake skin were both shedding. Mine did it after I was sunburned. What initiates a snake skin to start shedding? Another initiation I thought it was interesting, having to do with fatality, is a dragonfly flying at the sunroof or windshield. It doesn't splat upon contact. I think because it has a long backside, it's able to utter like a rudder on a boat, left or right, and come out in a different direction and not hit front on into a windshield and explode. And so when this does not explode, it allows it to veer left or right in any direction other than straight on and hit it at a point. Where if you get towed in your car from a ditch, the area where the tow truck is pulling is in opposite of the ditch. So it's trying to iterate that angle to overcompensate and pull out from being under a ditch. So when regular flies, they don't have the long tail in the back like a dragonfly, then it just splats on the windshield upon contact. And the difference between a dragonfly having that grace period where it isn't splattering and is allowed to articulate a different central point and just maneuver out from it is actually pretty interesting, because it could save a whole bunch of lives from people becoming vegetables. The scariest way to go out is where I just saw a chipmunk leap. Is if you get blindsided. This chipmunk got hit with the car and then it went to the ground with its back on the ground. Its tail was up in the sky between its legs. I was right behind it getting hit, so I just drove over it. But right after I drove over it, meaning the wheels straddling it on both sides, so it saw my big car overpass it, so it was all black. Then a whole bunch of rain came down and just waterboarded it. And I say waterboarding because the amount of waterboarding, how our big mouths are equivalent to like water being poured in a stream down onto it, is equivalent to having really big raindrops to a chipmunk's mouth after it just got hit and can't move on the ground. So if those water drops were hitting its face, it would be equivalent to like waterboarding after you've been beaten. For example, this area is secluded to a corner, and when you get cornered is the worst place to interact with people, because not only are you cornered and only have limited options that will be handled as according to what they call free motion or free bands. But if you're in a corner, you're unable to capitalize off either of them. So the retention time would increase, or the bad omens would increase, and then you're going to have to handle both just because your coordination was off. But for something bad like that to happen, it would have to be on epic scales. So much was that in the Ice Age, where all the dinosaurs got frozen because the land was cursed, this happened by default when it's game over